Professor Zixnax stepped into the classroom, his tentacles swaying with an air of excitement that was palpable even to the most oblivious of his alien students. The Galactic University of Xenostudies was abuzz with anticipation for today's lecture, and who could blame them? It wasn't every day that you got to learn about the most terrifying species in the known universe, humans. Settle down, Class. Zixnax gurgled, his speech translator working overtime to convert his natural bubbling sounds into something the diverse array of students could understand. Today we're diving into the fascinating and utterly horrifying world of human weaponry. Try not to have nightmares, will you? I'd hate to have to fill out more trauma counseling forms. A ripple of nervous laughter echoed through the room. The holographic display flickered to life, showing an image of Earth, a beautiful blue marble that looked deceptively peaceful. Ah, Earth, Zixnax mused, his tentacles twirling sarcastically. Looks harmless, doesn't it? Just like that adorable Flurbian acid spitter you tried to pet last week. Gloop, he pointed at a gelatinous student who was still sporting some impressive scars. Gloop burbled in embarrassment as the class erupted in a mixture of laughter and sympathetic winces. Now let's start with the basics, Zixnax continued, changing the display to show a primitive human wielding a club. This, my dear students, is where it all began. A stick. Yes, you heard me right. A stick. Humans looked at a branch and thought, you know what, I bet I could bash someone's brains out with that, charming, aren't they? The class collectively shuddered, their various appendages trembling in a universal display of disgust. But oh, it gets better, Zixnax chuckled darkly. They didn't stop at sticks. No. These crafty little murder monkeys decided to attach sharper sticks to longer sticks. And voila, the image changed to show a spear. Instant shish kebab maker, now with extra reach. A tentacled student raised an appendage. Professor, surely they didn't stop there. Zixnax let out a sound that could only be described as a laugh sob. Oh, my sweet summer larva, if only. Humans have an uncanny ability to look at literally anything and think, how can I use this to kill something more efficiently? It's like their brains are wired for mass destruction with a side of creativity. The hologram shifted again, this time displaying a bow and arrow. See this? They took a bendy stick, attached a string, and then launched smaller, pointier sticks at high speeds, because apparently stabbing things from a distance is way more fun than doing it up close and personal. A collective gasp rippled through the classroom. The idea of projectile weapons was still a novelty to many galactic species, who had evolved past the need for such brutal tools. But wait, there's more, Zixnax exclaimed, his voice dripping with sarcastic enthusiasm. Humans, in their infinite wisdom, thought, hey, you know what would make this even better? If we set it on fire. And thus, the flaming arrow was born. Because regular arrows just weren't causing enough panic, apparently. The students were now a mix of horrified fascination and morbid curiosity. A small, furry creature in the back raised a paw timidly. Professor, did they ever consider, I don't know, not making weapons? Zixnax stared at the student for a long moment before bursting into hysterical laughter. Oh, sweet, innocent fluffkins. That's adorable. No, humans don't consider not making weapons. In fact, they consider making weapons out of things that aren't even weapons. The hologram changed again, this time showing a kitchen. Behold, the human food preparation area, also known as the improvised arsenal. See that he pointed to a knife. Chopping vegetables 1 minute, stabby the next. And the image zoomed in on a frying pan, cooking breakfast or bashing skulls. It's a 2-for-1 special. The class was now torn between laughter and abject terror. It was hard to tell if the professor was joking or deadly serious, a common problem when studying humans. Now, let's fast forward a bit, Zixnax said, his tentacles wiggling with excitement. Humans, not content with stabbing, smashing, or shooting things with arrows, decided to play with chemistry. And boy, did they play. The hologram displayed a primitive firearm. This, my friends, is where things get really interesting. Humans discovered that if you take some special dust, shove it down a metal tube with a small projectile, and light it on fire, you can launch said projectile at speeds that make our fastest spacecraft look like they're moving backwards. A student with multiple eyes blinked rapidly in confusion. But professor, why would they need to launch things so fast? Zixnax's tentacles drooped in exasperation. To kill things faster, of course. Keep up, Blinky. Humans operate on the principle of if it's worth killing, it's worth overkilling. The class nodded sagely, as if this explained everything about human nature. In a way, it did. But firearms were just the beginning, Zixnax continued, his voice taking on a tone of both awe and horror. Humans, in their never-ending quest to make bigger and better boom booms, started thinking really big. And I mean really big. The hologram changed to show a massive explosion, a mushroom cloud rising ominously into the sky. The entire class recoiled in shock. This, my dear students, is what humans call a nuclear weapon. It's the kind of thing that makes other species go, you know what, maybe we shouldn't mess with these crazy bipeds. A brave student raised a tentacle. But professor, surely they wouldn't actually use such a weapon? The destruction would be unimaginable. Zixnax fixed the student with all 3 of his eyes. Oh, my sweet summer child. They didn't just create it, they used it. Twice. On themselves. The classroom erupted into chaos. Students were shrieking, fainting, in one case, molting out of sheer stress. "Calm down, everyone," Zixnax shouted over the din. "They've only used it twice so far. These days, they mostly use it to threaten each other. It's called deterrence, and it's the galactic equivalent of holding a gun to your own head and saying, 'Don't make me do it.'" As the class settled down, a small silicon-based life form in the front row raised a crystalline appendage. "Professor, with all due respect, this seems highly improbable. Surely no species could survive long enough to achieve spaceflight with such a propensity for violence." Zixnax chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down the spines or equivalent structures of every student. "Ah, Silica, that's the beauty and terror of humanity. They don't just survive, they thrive on this stuff. War, conflict, competition. It's like rocket fuel for their technological advancement. One minute they're trying to blow each other up, the next they're curing diseases that have plagued them for millennia." The hologram shifted again, this time showing a timeline of human technological advancement. The students watched in awe as centuries of progress flashed before their eyes, each leap forward seemingly tied to some form of conflict or warfare. "You see," Zixnax continued, his voice taking on a tone of grudging admiration, "humans have this unique ability to turn their most destructive impulses into progress. It's like they're playing a cosmic game of anything you can do. I can do better, but the opponent is themselves." A student with a bioluminescent body pulsed with curiosity. "But Professor, if they're so adept at turning weapons into tools of progress, why are they still considered so dangerous?" Zixnax's tentacles writhed in what could only be described as a full-body eye roll. "Excellent question, Glowstick. It's because they never, ever stop. Just when you think they've reached the pinnacle of destructive capability, they go and surprise you." The hologram changed once more, this time displaying a sleek, almost beautiful spacecraft. "This class is a human warship. Notice how it doesn't bristle with obvious weapons? That's because the entire ship is a weapon. They figured out how to turn the very principles of physics into instruments of destruction." The class collectively leaned forward, morbidly fascinated. Gravity manipulation, dark matter harnessing, even the ability to create localized singularities, all weaponized. They looked at the fundamental forces of the universe and said, "Bet I could kill someone with that." A chorus of incredulous murmurs swept through the room. The idea that any species would be audacious enough to weaponize the very fabric of reality was mind-boggling. Zixnax continued, his voice a mixture of awe and exasperation. "But here's the kicker, folks. Humans don't just make weapons for practical reasons. Oh no, that would be far too sensible. They make weapons for fun." The hologram shifted to show various scenes of human entertainment, action movies, video games, paintball matches, and more. The students watched in fascinated horror as humans simulated violence for enjoyment. "That's right," Zixnax said, his tentacles gesticulating wildly. "They turn their weapons into toys, their wars into games. They create entire virtual worlds just so they can pretend to shoot each other without actually dying. It's like they can't go 5 minutes without simulating some form of conflict." A student with a hive mind spoke up, its collective voice buzzing with confusion. "But Professor, if they enjoy conflict so much, how have they not destroyed themselves? How can they function as a society?" Zixnax let out a long, bubbly sigh. "That, my dear Hyvy, is the paradox of humanity. They are capable of both incredible violence and incredible compassion, often in the same breath. They'll spend billions developing a weapon that can vaporize a planet, then turn around and use the technology to save lives." The hologram displayed scenes of human medical facilities, disaster relief efforts, and scientific breakthroughs. The juxtaposition with the earlier images of warfare was jarring. "Humans have this frustrating habit of being walking contradictions," Zixnax explained. "They're capable of unspeakable cruelty, yet also unparalleled kindness. They'll fight wars over the pettiest differences, then unite in the face of a common threat. It's enough to give a xenopsychologist a nervous breakdown." The class nodded in unison, many of them making notes to avoid a career in human studies for the sake of their mental health. "But here's the real kicker," Zixnax said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Despite all their weapons, despite their violent history and their perpetual state of conflict, humans are classified as a protected species in the galactic community. Can anyone tell me why?" The classroom was silent for a long moment before a brave arachnoid student clicked its mandibles nervously. Is it because we're afraid of them?" Zixnax's tentacles wiggled in approval. "Got it in one, Spidey. Humans are under galactic protection for the simple reason that nobody wants to risk pissing them off. It's the interstellar equivalent of not poking the sleeping bear, except this bear has nukes and a tendency to make friends with its former enemies." The hologram changed one last time, showing a diverse group of aliens and humans working together on what appeared to be a massive space station. "This class is the current state of human relations with the galactic community. They're out there mixing with other species, sharing their technology, and generally being, well, human." A collective shudder ran through the class at the thought of humans spreading throughout the galaxy. "Now I know what you're thinking," Zixnax said, his voice taking on a mock reassuring tone. "But Professor, surely we're safe as long as we don't provoke them, right? Well, Let me tell you a little secret about humans." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a stage whisper. "They don't need provocation. They'll befriend you, learn your culture, try your food, and then one day you'll wake up and realize they've completely upended your society, and you'll thank them for it." The class erupted into nervous laughter, unsure whether to be terrified or amused. "You see, humans have this annoying habit of improving things," Zixnax continued, his tentacles making air quotes. "They'll look at a perfectly good alien technology and say, 'You know what this needs? More DACA.' And before you know it, your simple atmospheric harmonizer has been turned into a weather control device that can create localized hurricanes." A gasp rippled through the classroom. The idea of weaponizing weather was both horrifying and, admittedly, a little cool. "But it's not all doom and gloom," Zixnax said, his tone softening slightly. "Humans have this other annoying habit of solving problems you didn't even know you had. They'll stumble into your solar system, take one look at your perfectly adequate fusion reactors, and go, 'Aw, that's cute. I want to see how to harness the power of a quasar.'" The students exchanged glances, a mixture of fear and excitement in their various eyes, optical sensors, and sensory pits. "The trick to dealing with humans," Zixnax continued, "is to always expect the unexpected. Just when you think you've got them figured out, they'll do something so outrageous, so completely bonkers, that you'll be left wondering if your universal translator is malfunctioning." The hologram flickered one last time, showing a human and alien sharing a meal. The human was enthusiastically explaining something, gesticulating wildly, while the alien looked on with a mixture of confusion and amusement. "This class is perhaps the most dangerous aspect of humanity," Zixnax said, his voice taking on a tone of grudging respect. "Their enthusiasm is infectious. You'll start out terrified of them, then confused by them, and before you know it, you'll be helping them jury-rig a supernova into a galactic dance party." The class laughed, the tension of the earlier part of the lecture finally breaking. "So in conclusion," Zixnax said, his tentacles spread wide, "humans are dangerous as unpredictable and absolutely fascinating. They'll terrify you, befriend you, and change your entire worldview, possibly all in the same day. They're the galaxy's ultimate wild card, and stars help us all. We wouldn't have it any other way." As the class filed out, chattering excitedly about what they'd learned, Zixnax couldn't help but chuckle to himself. He'd been studying humans for decades, and they still managed to surprise him. Just last week, a human exchange student had shown him how to turn his simple data pad into a device capable of hacking the university's mainframe. For educational purposes only, of course. Zixnax shook his head in amusement. Humans, he thought. Can't live with them. Can't live without them. Mostly because they'd probably figure out how to weaponize living without them. As he packed up his teaching materials, Zixnax noticed a small object on his desk that hadn't been there before. It was a human device, a Swiss Army knife, if he remembered correctly. Attached was a note that read, "Thought you might find this interesting, Prof. It's got 47 functions so far. We're working on adding a few more. Thanks for the great lecture, your friendly neighborhood humans." Zixnax stared at the device, then at the empty classroom, then back at the device. Finally, he let out a long, bubbling sigh. "Class dismissed," he muttered to himself. "And may the stars help us all." Zixnax turned the Swiss Army knife over in his tentacles, marveling at its compact design. 47 functions, he muttered to himself. "I bet at least 10 of them are for stabbing things in increasingly creative ways." As if on cue, the device sprung to life, unfolding a dizzying array of tools. Zixnax let out a startled gurgle and dropped it on his desk, where it continued to unfurl like some sort of mechanical flower. "By the great void," he exclaimed, watching in fascination as the knife revealed functions he couldn't even begin to comprehend. Was that a quantum entanglement detector? And was that tiny appendage actually a miniature terraforming device? A chuckle from the doorway made him spin around. There, leaning against the frame with a mischievous grin, was Sarah Chen, one of the human exchange students. "Having fun, Professor?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with amusement. Zixnax's tentacles writhed in embarrassment. "Miss Chen, I was just examining this fascinating piece of human technology. For purely academic reasons, of course." Sarah sauntered into the room, her movements carrying that peculiar mix of grace and potential violence that all humans seem to possess. "Of course, Professor. Academic reasons, that's why you were poking it like it might explode at any moment." "Well, with human technology, one can never be too careful," Zixnax retorted, trying to regain his composure. "I assume this was your doing." Sarah's grin widened. "Guilty as charged. I thought you might appreciate a hands-on demonstration after your lecture. By the way, that was quite a performance. I particularly enjoyed your impression of a human discovering fire for the first time." Zixnax felt his chromatophores flush with a mix of pride and embarrassment. "Yes, well, one must make the material engaging for the students, though I must admit I may have embellished certain aspects for dramatic effect." Oh, Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Do tell, Professor. Which parts were embellished? The bit about us weaponizing black holes, or the part where you suggested we might accidentally turn the galaxy into a giant disco ball?" Zixnax waved a tentacle dismissively. "Mere hyperbole, I assure you." though I stand by my assertion that humans have an uncanny ability to turn anything into a weapon. Case in point, he gestured at the still unfolding Swiss Army knife, which had now expanded to cover half his desk. Sarah laughed, a sound that never failed to both charm and unnerve Zix-Nax. Fair enough, Professor. But you know, there's something you missed in your lecture, something crucial about human nature and our approach to weapons. Zix-Nax's eyes widened in surprise. He prided himself on his comprehensive knowledge of human history and culture. What could he have possibly missed? Oh, and what might that be, Miss Chen? Sarah's expression turned serious, a transformation that Zix-Nax found unsettling. Humans could switch from jovial to intense in the blink of an eye, a trait that made them particularly unpredictable. You focused a lot on our capacity for destruction, Professor Sarah began, idly toying with one of the many gadgets protruding from the Swiss Army knife. And you're not wrong. We humans have a knack for turning the ordinary into the deadly, and the deadly into the catastrophic. But that's not the whole story. Zix-Nax found himself leaning forward, his tentacles curling in anticipation. Go on, he urged, his academic curiosity piqued. The thing is, Professor Sarah continued, her eyes meeting his, for every weapon we create, we also create a dozen tools for peace. For every destructive impulse, there's an equal drive to protect and nurture. It's not just about making bigger bombs or scarier guns. It's about the search for balance. Zix-Nax blinked in surprise. This was not what he had expected. Balance? But your history is filled with conflict, with constant advancements in warfare. Sarah nodded, a sad smile playing on her lips. True. But look closer, Professor. For every war, there's a peace movement. For every weapon, there's a medical breakthrough. Heck, some of our greatest advancements in medicine and technology came as a result of trying to fix the damage we've done. She picked up the Swiss Army knife, which had finally stopped unfolding, and held it out to Zix-Nax. Take this, for example. Sure, it's got a blade that could be used as a weapon, but it's also got tools for survival, for building, for healing. It's a microcosm of humanity itself, capable of harm, yes, but also capable of incredible good. Zix-Nax took the device gingerly, examining it with new eyes. He had to admit, for every potentially dangerous tool, there were several that were purely practical or even life-saving. I hadn't considered it from that perspective, he admitted, feeling a mixture of embarrassment and excitement at this new insight. But surely the galactic community's fear of humanity isn't entirely unfounded. Sarah shrugged, her expression a mix of pride and resignation. Oh, it's founded all right. We're dangerous, no doubt about it. But we're not just a threat. We're also the ones you want on your side when things go sideways. We're the ones who'll move heaven and earth to save a single life, who'll stare into the abyss and say, bring it on. Zix-Nax found himself nodding slowly, his perception of humanity shifting before his eyes. It's a lot to process, Ms. Chen. You're saying that your species' propensity for violence is matched by an equal capacity for what? Heroism? Compassion? Exactly, Sarah beamed. For every destroyer, we've got a creator. For every warmonger, a peacemaker. It's not about being purely good or purely bad. It's about the choices we make, individually and as a species. A thought occurred to Zix-Nax, making his tentacles twitch with excitement. Is that why humans are so adaptable? This duality allows you to thrive in any situation. Sarah snapped her fingers, pointing at Zix-Nax with enthusiasm. Now you're getting it, Professor. It's not about being perfect. It's about being flexible, about learning from our mistakes, sometimes the hard way, and always pushing forward. Zix-Nax felt like his entire worldview was being reorganized. He had always seen humans as a fascinating but ultimately dangerous species. Now he was beginning to understand that their potential for destruction was only half the story. Miss Chen, he said slowly, I believe you've just given me material for an entire semester's worth of lectures. Sarah laughed, the sound filling the room with warmth. Happy to help, Professor. Just remember, next time you're telling your students about our scary weapons and warlike tendencies, throw in a bit about our capacity for love, our drive to explore, our ability to come together in times of crisis. It's all part of the package. As Sarah turned to leave, Zix-Nax called out, Ms. Chen, one last question if I may. She paused at the door, looking back with curiosity. Shoot, Professor. Figuratively speaking, of course. Zix-Nax chuckled at the very human idiom. This Swiss Army knife. You mentioned it has 47 functions, but then you said you were working on adding more. What else could you possibly add to such a comprehensive tool? Sarah's grin turned mischievous once more. Oh, you know, this and that. A universal translator, a miniature fusion reactor, maybe a small wormhole generator for interstellar travel, the usual stuff. Before Zix-Nax could sputter a response, Sarah winked and disappeared down the hallway, leaving the professor alone with his thoughts and a very complicated piece of human technology. Zix-Nax looked down at the Swiss Army knife, then at the door where Sarah had been, then back at the knife. Slowly, a laugh bubbled up from deep within him, growing until it filled the empty classroom. Humans, he chuckled, carefully pocketing the device. Just when you think you've got them figured out. As he gathered his things and prepared to leave, Zixnax couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. Tomorrow's lecture was going to be very interesting indeed. After all, he had a lot of revising to do, and a newfound appreciation for the complexity of humanity to share. Little did he know, as he left the classroom, that this was just the beginning. The Swiss Army knife in his pocket gave a small beep, unnoticed by the professor. Somewhere in the vast expanse of the galaxy, a signal was sent, received, and acknowledged. Operation Educate the Educator was proceeding exactly as planned. But that, as they say, is a story for another day. The next day, Professor Zixnax arrived at his classroom earlier than usual, his tentacles twitching with excitement. He had spent most of the night revising his lecture notes, fueled by a potent mixture of caffeine-equivalent and intellectual fervor. The Swiss Army knife sat on his desk, innocuous yet somehow ominous in its complexity. As students began to file in, Zixnax noticed an unusual buzz in the air. Whispers and excited chirps filled the room, and more than a few curious glances were directed his way. He was just about to call the class to order when the door burst open, admitting a breathless Gloop, the gelatinous student who had been scarred by the Flurbian acid spitter. Professor Gloop burbled, its translucent body rippling with excitement. Have you seen the news? It's all over the galactic net. Zixnax felt a tendril of unease curl around his primary heart. What news, Gloop? And please, try to maintain some decorum. We are in a classroom, not a Centaurian mosh pit. But Gloop was beyond decorum. It's about humans, Professor. They've done it again. They've... Spit it out, Gloop. Zixnax sighed, his patience wearing thin. What have the humans done now? Weaponized dark matter, turned a black hole into a lava lamp, used the fabric of space-time to make a really comfortable hammock. The class tittered nervously, but Gloop's next words silenced them all. They've made first contact with the Void Dwellers, Professor, and they're throwing a party. The silence that followed was so profound that Zixnax could hear the subtle hum of the building's anti-gravity generators. His tentacles went limp with shock. The Void Dwellers were a legendary species said to inhabit the dark spaces between galaxies. They were thought to be so advanced, so utterly beyond comprehension, that most species considered them more myth than reality. And the humans were throwing them a party. That's impossible, Zixnax stammered, his speech translator struggling to keep up with his rapid-fire thoughts. The Void Dwellers are beyond our understanding. How could humans possibly? He trailed off as his eyes fell on the Swiss Army knife. Suddenly, Sarah Chen's parting words echoed in his mind, a universal translator, a miniature fusion reactor, maybe a small wormhole generator for interstellar travel, the usual stuff. With trembling tentacles, Zixnax reached for the device. As his appendage made contact, the knife sprang to life, unfolding in a dizzying array of tools and gadgets. But this time, a holographic display flickered to life above it, showing a smiling Sarah Chen. "Hello, Professor," the hologram said, its voice filling the now silent classroom. "If you're seeing this, it means Operation Educate the Educator was a success. Congratulations. You've just taken your first step into a larger universe." Zixnax stared at the hologram, his three eyes wide with disbelief. "Ms. Chen? What is the meaning of this?" The holographic Sarah winked. "It's simple, Professor. Everything you've taught about humans, it's all true. But it's also just the tip of the iceberg. We are dangerous, we are unpredictable, and yes, we can turn anything into a weapon. But we can also turn anything into a tool for peace, for exploration, for understanding." The hologram expanded, showing images of vast space stations, of humans working alongside countless alien species, of wonders that defied description. The Swiss Army knife you're holding. It's not just a tool, it's a key to the real galactic community, the one that exists beyond the fears and misconceptions that have kept us isolated. Zixnax felt his world tilting on its axis. But the Galactic University, the protected status of Earth, all part of the plan, Professor Holographic Sarah explained. A plan to gradually introduce humanity to the wider galaxy and vice versa. We needed to be seen as dangerous enough to be respected, but intriguing enough to be studied. And who better to spread the word than a brilliant xenobiologist with a flair for the dramatic? The class was utterly silent, hanging on every word. Zixnax realized with a start that this wasn't just a revelation for him, it was a revelation for every student in the room. They were all witnessing history in the making. "So, Professor Zixnax," the hologram continued, "are you ready for the real lecture? The one about how humanity isn't just surviving in a hostile universe, but thriving. About how we've turned our contradictions into our greatest strength. About how we're not just making weapons, but building bridges between worlds." Zixnax looked around the classroom, seeing the eager faces of his students, the future diplomats, scientists, and leaders of 100 different species. He thought about everything he thought he knew about humans, about the galaxy, about his own place in the universe. And then, slowly, he felt his mouth tentacles curl into a smile. "Ms. Chen," he said, straightening to his full height, "I believe it's time for a new curriculum." Class, he turned to his students, his voice filled with newfound purpose. Forget everything I taught you yesterday. Today, we're going to learn about the real humanity, and trust me, it's going to blow your minds. As if on cue, the Swiss Army knife gave a cheerful beep and projected a star map onto the classroom ceiling. At its center was Earth, but spreading out from it were countless lines connecting to worlds and species Zixnax had never even imagined. Now then, Zixnax said, his tentacles wiggling with excitement, let's begin with the basics. Humanity's first rule of the galaxy: always bring a towel and never panic. The classroom erupted into a cacophony of questions, exclamations, and in one case, spontaneous molting. But beneath the chaos, there was a palpable sense of wonder and excitement. The universe, it seemed, was a far more interesting place than any of them had imagined. And at the center of it all stood Professor Zixnax, still clutching the Swiss Army knife, ready to embark on the greatest adventure of his academic career. After all, he mused as he began to address the clamoring students, if there's one thing humans had taught him, it's that the fun was just beginning. Somewhere, in a hidden base on Earth's moon, Sarah Shen leaned back in her chair and smiled. Mission accomplished, she said to no one in particular. Now, let's see what they do with it. The galaxy, it seemed, was in for quite a ride, and humanity, as always, was leading the charge, one Swiss Army knife at a time.